The courtroom stretched across what felt like miles of polished crystal floor, its walls reaching up into darkness where alien eyes watched from floating platforms. Captain Jake Morrison stood at the center of it all, his hands bound behind his back with energy shackles that hummed softly in the silence. Around him, representatives from 47 different alien species sat in judgment, their forms ranging from the towering crystalline Zephyrians to the writhing mass of tentacles that made up the Colliery collective consciousness. Jake had been chosen to speak for all of humanity, though he wondered if his words would matter now. The trial had lasted 3 standard months, with witness after witness testifying about human aggression, human unpredictability, human danger to galactic peace. The prosecutor, a Zephyrian whose crystal body shifted through colors that hurt to look at directly, had painted humans as a species of violent chaos that threatened the careful order the galaxy had maintained for thousands of years. Admiral Lisa Hayes watched from the human section, her jaw tight as she listened to the final arguments. She had commanded fleets that protected alien trade routes from pirates, had negotiated peaceful settlements to border disputes, had even saved Colliery colony ships from solar flares. None of it seemed to matter now. The galaxy had decided that humanity was too dangerous to remain part of civilized space. The charges were read in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once, translated into human speech by neural implants that made Jake's skull ache. Excessive aggression in territorial disputes, unpredictable responses to diplomatic overtures, refusal to accept proper galactic authority. The final charge made Jake's blood boil. Corruption of other species through exposure to human values. That last one stung because it was partly true. Human ideals of individual freedom and self-determination had indeed spread to other species. Young Zephyrians questioned their crystal hierarchy. Colliery individuals began thinking for themselves instead of following the collective. The rigid order that had kept the galaxy peaceful was starting to crack, and the alien leadership blamed humanity for introducing dangerous concepts like personal choice and democratic decision-making. Commander Ryan Blake shifted in his seat. Behind Lisa, his augmented arm clicking softly as servos adjusted his grip on the chair. He had lost that arm defending a Colliery research station from raiders, and now those same Colliery were voting to exile his entire species. The irony wasn't lost on him, though he kept his expression neutral. Military discipline ran deep, even here in this cosmic kangaroo court. The Zephyrian prosecutor's voice cut through Jake's thoughts as it began its closing statement. Humanity, it claimed, was a cancer in the galactic body. They brought chaos where there should be order, violence where there should be peace, and worst of all, they spread ideas that made other species question the natural hierarchy of things. The galaxy had prospered for millennia under the guidance of its elder races, and humans threatened to destroy that prosperity with their reckless individualism. Dr. Maya Foster sat in the scientist section, her tablet recording everything despite knowing it probably wouldn't matter. She had devoted her life to studying alien technologies, had helped develop the translation protocols that made this trial possible, had even married a Zephyrian researcher in the name of interspecies cooperation. Her husband had filed for dissolution of their bond the moment the trial began, claiming he couldn't be associated with a member of such a dangerous species. The defense had been perfunctory at best. Jake's lawyer, an elderly Colliery who seemed to be going through the motions, had argued that humanity was young and could learn to be more civilized. He presented evidence of human art, human music, human literature that spoke of peace and love and cooperation. The prosecutors dismissed it all as naive propaganda that masked humanity's true violent nature. When the verdict came, it surprised no one. Guilty on all charges. The sentence, however, was something new in galactic history. Rather than simple execution or forced relocation to a penal world, the Council had devised something they called corrective isolation. Humanity would be sealed within their home system, cut off from the rest of the galaxy by an energy barrier that would take 50 years to fully stabilize. The barrier, they explained, would give humanity time to evolve beyond their violent tendencies. Cut off from their ability to corrupt other species or start wars, humans would either develop into something more civilized or simply fade away as their aggression turned inward. Either outcome would be acceptable to the galactic community. Jake listened to the sentence with growing fury. They were treating humanity like misbehaving children being sent to their room, expected to emerge decades later as properly domesticated pets. The condescension in the judge's voice made his hands clench into fists. Despite the energy shackles, the escort fleet was already waiting when the human delegation emerged from the courthouse. Massive alien dreadnoughts surrounded the small human vessels, their weapons powered but not yet targeted. The message was clear: comply with the sentence or face immediate destruction. Admiral Hayes had barely 1,000 ships under her command, while the aliens had assembled a force 10 times that size as they traveled toward the Sol system. Jake found himself on the bridge of the HSS Defiance alongside Admiral Hayes and Commander Blake. The ship hummed around them, human engineering at its finest, but it felt small and fragile compared to the alien vessels that flanked them on all sides. The journey would take 2 weeks at maximum hyperspace speed, 2 weeks to reach the edge of human space and watch it be sealed away forever. Dr. Foster worked frantically in her lab during the transit, scanning and analyzing every piece of alien technology she could access. If humanity was going to be cut off from galactic civilization, she wanted to understand as much as possible about how that civilization worked. Her colleagues called her obsessed, but Maya knew that knowledge would be humanity's only weapon in the dark years ahead. The barrier construction began the moment they reached the outer edge of the Sol system. Massive alien constructor ships moved into position around the heliopause, deploying energy projectors that began weaving streams of exotic matter into a containment field. The technology was far beyond human understanding, drawing power from dimensions that human science couldn't even properly detect. Captain Morrison watched from the observation deck as humanity's connection to the galaxy was severed piece by piece. Communication arrays went dark as the barrier blocked faster than light transmissions. Trade routes that had carried human goods and ideas to distant worlds were suddenly empty. The steady stream of alien visitors to Earth's orbital stations became a trickle, then stopped entirely. The alien fleet commanders delivered their final message with typical galactic bureaucratic efficiency. Humanity had 50 years to prove they could become civilized. The barrier would be monitored remotely, and any attempt to breach it would result in the immediate sterilization of the entire Sol system. When the 50 years were up, the galaxy would determine whether humanity had evolved sufficiently to rejoin civilized spacedock as the last alien ship disappeared into hyperspace, leaving humanity alone with their shame and isolation. Jake Morrison made a promise that he spoke aloud to the empty observation deck. The galaxy thought it was teaching humanity a lesson, thought it was containing a dangerous species until they learned to behave. They had no idea what humans were capable of when their backs were truly against the wall. Admiral Hayes joined him at the viewport, watching the barrier's energy patterns dance across the stars like aurora in the void. The aliens expected humanity to emerge from this exile, either broken or domesticated, ready to accept their place as junior partners in galactic civilization. They would learn how wrong they were about human nature. Commander Blake's augmented fingers drummed against the metal railing as he studied the barrier's construction. 50 years seemed like a long time, but he had seen what human ingenuity could accomplish when properly motivated. The galaxy had just given humanity the greatest motivation in their history, survival itself. Dr. Foster's voice came over the ship's communication system, excited despite their dire circumstances. Her scans had revealed something interesting about the barrier technology, something the aliens probably hadn't intended her to discover. The barrier wasn't just keeping humanity in, it was also harvesting energy from Sol itself, feeding power. Back to the alien civilizations beyond, the revelation changed everything. This wasn't just an exile, it was exploitation. The aliens weren't just containing humanity out of fear. They were using human space as a power source for their own societies. Jake Morrison smiled for the first time since the trial began. The galaxy had made two critical mistakes. They had underestimated human determination, and they had given humanity a very good reason to be angry. The exile had begun, but humanity's story was far from over. 25 years had passed since the barrier fell across human space like a curtain of fire and energy. The generation that remembered the galaxy beyond was growing old, and their children had grown up knowing only the confines of the Sol system. But these younger humans were not the broken prisoners their captors had expected them to become. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Chun stood on the observation deck of Titan Station, watching construction crews put the finishing touches on humanity's newest weapon. The HSS Vengeance stretched nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern, its hull black as the void and bristling with technology that no alien had ever seen. Amy had been born 3 years after the exile began, and she had never known a world where humanity bowed to alien authority. The ship before her represented everything humanity had learned in their isolation. Without access to alien technology and trade routes, humans had been forced to innovate or die. The Vengeance used quantum-entangled communication arrays that could send messages instantly across the solar system, plasma cannons that drew power directly from miniaturized fusion reactors, and armor plating made from materials that human scientists had developed by studying asteroid compositions. Engineer Nick Rodriguez floated beside her in his maintenance suit, making final adjustments to the ship's sensor array. His grandfather had been on the escort fleet that brought humanity home 25 years ago, but Nick belonged to the exile generation. He had grown up hearing stories about the galaxy beyond the barrier, but those stories felt like fairy tales compared to the reality of human ingenuity unleashed. Nick had spent the last 5 years working on what he called the Breakthrough Project, a systematic analysis of the barrier that surrounded their system. What he had discovered would have shocked their alien captors if they had known about it. The barrier wasn't just a prison wall. It was the most sophisticated energy collection system ever built. Every photon of sunlight that hit it, every solar wind particle that struck its surface, was converted into usable power and transmitted through subspace to alien civilizations across the galaxy. The discovery had changed everything about how humanity viewed their exile. They weren't just prisoners serving time for being too aggressive. They were unwilling power sources keeping alien civilization running. The barrier that was supposed to contain them was actually feeding off them, and that knowledge had turned simmering resentment into cold fury. Commander Jake Morrison, now Admiral Morrison, walked the corridors of the Vengeance with the measured pace of a man who had learned patience through necessity. The eager captain who had stood trial all those years ago had been replaced by someone harder, more calculating, but no less determined. He had spent 2 decades building the Human Defense Corps from scratch, creating a military force that thought and fought unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The old galactic military doctrine relied on massive ships slugging it out at close range, with battles decided by whoever had the bigger guns and thicker armor. Human tactics had evolved in a different direction entirely. Their ships were smaller, faster, and designed for long-range engagement, using weapons that could strike targets light minutes away. They had learned to fight like wolves instead of bears, using speed and cunning instead of brute force. Dr. Maya Foster, now Director Foster, supervised the final tests of the Vengeance's experimental systems from her laboratory on Luna. She had aged gracefully over the past 25 years, but her eyes held a fire that had only grown stronger with time. Her marriage to the Zephyrian researcher had been annulled the day humanity was exiled, but Maya had taken that betrayal and turned it into motivation. The technology she had helped develop over the past quarter century would have seemed like magic to the humans who first encountered alien civilization. Computers that thought faster than any organic brain, manufacturing systems that could build complex machinery from raw atomic matter, and medical devices that could repair damage at the cellular level. Humanity had not just survived their exile. They had used it to leapfrog past their former captors in almost every field of science that young Captain Ben Taylor reviewed the final mission briefings aboard the HSS Defiance, the ship that had carried his father home from the trial so many years ago. Ben had never seen an alien except in archived recordings, but he had trained his entire adult life to fight them. The exiled generation had grown up with a very different perspective on galactic civilization than their parents possessed, where the older generation remembered alien allies and friends alongside the betrayal. Ben's generation knew only the stories of abandonment and imprisonment. They had been raised on tales of human merchants cheated by alien partners, human soldiers left to die by alien commanders, and human researchers having their discoveries stolen by alien colleagues. The exile had given them 25 years to nurture their anger into something cold and sharp. The Vengeance launched on a cold Tuesday morning, its engines barely making a whisper as it accelerated away from Titan at speeds that would have amazed the human engineers of a generation ago. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge, watching Earth shrink behind them as they headed for the barrier's edge. This wasn't an escape attempt, it was reconnaissance. They needed to understand exactly how their prison worked before they could plan. Their eventual breakout. Nick Rodriguez monitored the ship's approach to the barrier from his engineering station, sensors probing the energy field that had held them captive for so long. The barrier looked solid from a distance, but up close it revealed itself to be incredibly complex. Millions of intersecting energy streams created a web that could stop anything from passing through, while simultaneously harvesting power from everything that struck it. The breakthrough came when Nick realized that the barrier's complexity was also its weakness. The energy streams had to be perfectly synchronized to maintain the field's integrity, and that synchronization required constant communication between the barrier generators positioned around the system's edge. If those communications could be disrupted, even briefly, sections of the barrier might destabilize. Captain Taylor studied the sensor readings with growing excitement. The aliens had built their prison to contain humans as they had been 25 years ago, not as they had become. The barrier was designed to stop ships using the fusion drives and plasma weapons that human vessels had carried during the exile. It had no defenses against the quantum-entangled projectiles and dimensional phase, torpedoes that humanity had developed in isolation. Director Foster received the data transmission on Luna and immediately began running simulations on her most advanced computers. The results were better than she had dared hope. Not only could human weapons damage the barrier, but they could do so in ways that would cascade through the entire system. The aliens had created a masterpiece of engineering, but they had also created a house of cards that could be toppled by someone who understood its structure. Admiral Morrison made the decision that would change everything. The reconnaissance mission became a test firing, with the Vengeance launching a single quantum torpedo at a carefully chosen section of the barrier. The weapon struck with surgical precision, disrupting the energy synchronization for exactly 1.3 seconds before automatic systems restored the field's integrity. 1.3 seconds was long enough for human sensors to map the barrier's internal structure completely. It was also long enough for a message to slip through to the galaxy beyond, though nobody on the Vengeance realized it at the time. The message was simple, consisting of just a few words in old Earth mathematics. Humanity was not only still alive, but they had grown strong enough to hurt their prison. The implications of the successful test spread through human space like wildfire. For 25 years, they had been told they were prisoners serving time for their aggressive nature. Now they knew they were hostages being held to power alien civilization, and they had just proven they could fight back. The Exiled generation had found their purpose, and it burned brighter than the fires that powered their ships. Lieutenant Colonel Chun began mobilizing the defense corps for what everyone knew was coming. The test had been successful, but it had also been noticed. Somewhere beyond the barrier, alien sensors had detected the breach and the message that slipped through. The galaxy that had forgotten about humanity was about to be reminded that humans never forgot their enemies. Engineer Rodriguez worked around the clock to prepare more weapons capable of damaging the barrier. Each torpedo took months to build, using materials that had to be mined from the outer system, but they were humanity's key to freedom. The young generation had grown up in prison, but they would not die there. Dr. Foster coordinated with research stations throughout the system, sharing data and coordinating efforts to understand what lay beyond their prison walls. 25 years of isolation had ended with a single torpedo shot, and now humanity prepared for whatever response their former captors might send. The exile was almost over, but the war for humanity's future was just beginning. The generation born in captivity was about to show the galaxy what humans became when you tried to cage them. The barrier flickered for the first time in 25 years, its perfect energy streams wavering like candle flames in a strong wind. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the Vengeance, watching sensor readings that should have been impossible. The alien construction that had imprisoned humanity was failing, and the failure was spreading across multiple sections simultaneously. Captain Ben Taylor received the emergency transmission on the HSS Defiance while conducting patrol runs near Neptune. The message came through on frequencies that had been silent since the exile began, crackling with interference from the destabilizing barrier. A voice spoke in broken human standard, the accent strange and desperate. "Human vessels, this is Commander Elena Vasquez of the Terran Defense Coalition. Please respond." The name meant nothing to Ben or his crew, but the fact that someone was calling them from beyond the barrier changed everything. Director Foster confirmed the transmissions. Origin within hours, triangulating the signal to a position just outside the barrier's edge. Someone in human space was trying to make contact, and they were using codes and protocols that predated the exile. The full message came through 12 hours later as the barrier's fluctuations grew stronger. Commander Vasquez identified herself as a representative of surviving human colonies that had been beyond the Sol system when the barrier fell. She had spent 25 years building alliances with alien refugee groups, and now she brought desperate news. The galaxy was dying, consumed by an enemy that the great powers could not stop. Engineer Nick Rodriguez analyzed the barrier's behavior from his station on Titan, his instruments detecting energy patterns that defied everything he understood about the alien technology. The failure wasn't random or accidental. It was being caused by massive power draws from the other side. Something was demanding so much energy from the galactic power grid that even the Sol barrier couldn't maintain stability. The enemy had a name that struck fear into every species that encountered it: the Devourers. They came from beyond the galactic rim, machines of impossible sophistication that consumed entire star systems to fuel their expansion. No one knew who had built them or why they had awakened after eons of slumber, but their purpose was clear. They sought to convert all matter in the galaxy into pure energy for reasons no organic mind could comprehend. Admiral Morrison listened to Elena's briefings with growing horror and bitter satisfaction. The proud Zephyrian crystal worlds that had judged humanity so harshly were now shattered ruins. Their inhabitants fled or dead. The Colliery Collective that had voted for human exile was reduced to scattered fragments, their hive minds broken by the psychological warfare the machines employed. The galaxy that had exiled humanity was begging for their help. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Chun coordinated the Defense Corps' response as more transmissions came through the weakening barrier. The galactic situation was worse than Elena's initial REPORT had suggested. Over 40% of known space had been consumed by the Devourers, with entire sectors going dark as machine fleets stripped systems down to their component atoms. The remaining alien civilizations were in full retreat, their coordination shattered by panic and mutual blame. The request for help came with detailed, tactical data that painted a picture of galactic military incompetence that astounded human observers. The aliens had responded to the Devourer threat with the same rigid doctrines they had used for millennia, sending massive fleets to fight pitched battles that the machines won through superior technology and numbers. Worse, the aliens seemed incapable of adapting their tactics when their traditional approaches failed. Dr. Maya Foster studied the Devourer technology profiles with the eye of someone who had spent decades analyzing alien engineering. The machines were impressive, but not invincible, using principles that human science could understand and potentially counter. More importantly, the Devourers seemed to have adapted their tactics, specifically to defeat traditional galactic military doctrine. They had never encountered human-style warfare. Captain Taylor volunteered to lead the first reconnaissance mission beyond the barrier, taking the Defiance through a gap that Elena's people had managed to force open using jury-rigged human and alien technology. What he found on the other side shocked him more than the reports had suggested. The galaxy was not just under attack, it was completely transformed by terror. The Zephyrian commander, who met Taylor at the rendezvous point, was nothing like the proud crystal beings who had condemned humanity decades ago. This one's structure was cracked and dim, its voice barely a whisper as it described the fall of its homeworld. The great crystal cities that had stood for thousands of years were now rubble, their population either dead or scattered to refugee camps in systems that fell. Devourers had not yet reached. Elena Vasquez herself was a revelation to the humans who had grown up in exile. She represented the few thousand humans who had been beyond soul when the barrier fell, and she had spent 25 years building networks among alien survivors and resistance groups. Her people had maintained human traditions and values while adapting to galactic politics in ways that the exiled population never could. The negotiations that followed were unlike anything in galactic history. The alien representatives who came to plead for human assistance were the same species that had once judged humanity too dangerous for civilized space. Now they offered complete autonomy, full citizenship rights, territorial concessions, and reparations for the exile. Their desperation was so complete that they were willing to accept any terms humanity demanded. Admiral Morrison made it clear that humanity's help would come with conditions that the old galactic order would never have accepted. Human military doctrine would take precedence in all operations against the Devourers. Human commanders would have authority over mixed species fleets. Most importantly, humanity would have the right to settle in any system they liberated, with full sovereignty over their new territories. The aliens agreed to everything without argument, their representatives signing treaties that essentially surrendered galactic leadership to a species they had exiled for being too aggressive. The irony was not lost on anyone present, but desperation had a way of clarifying priorities. A galaxy needed humanity's help to survive, and they were willing to pay any price to get it. General Steve Murphy began deploying human forces through the widening gaps in the barrier, leading fleets that had been built in secret over the past quarter century. The ships that emerged from human space were unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Sleek and fast vessels designed for hit-and-run tactics, rather than the slugging matches that alien doctrine preferred. The first engagement between human forces and the Devourers took place at the Kepler 442 system, where a machine fleet was in the process of dismantling the local star for raw materials. Murphy's task force hit them with quantum torpedoes fired for maximum range, destroying 3 Devourer ships before the machines even knew they were under attack. The human vessels then vanished back into hyperspace before the enemy could respond. The tactic was completely foreign to galactic military thinking, which emphasized honor and direct confrontation over stealth and surprise. The aliens who observed the battle were amazed by human willingness to attack from hiding and retreat before the enemy could retaliate. To them it seemed cowardly, but to the humans it was simply efficient. Director Foster established research stations in liberated systems, studying captured Devourer technology with a methodical approach that had allowed humanity to master the barrier's secrets. The machines were sophisticated but predictable, following programming that had been optimized to defeat alien tactics. Human unpredictability was something their creators had never anticipated. Captain Taylor led deep penetration missions into Devourer-controlled space, gathering intelligence about machine movements and capabilities. His reports painted a picture of an enemy that was powerful but not omnipotent, with logistics networks and command structures that could be disrupted by forces that understood their weaknesses. The key was avoiding direct confrontation while striking at critical infrastructure. The aliens watched with growing amazement as human forces began achieving victories that had seemed impossible. Systems that had been written off as lost were suddenly liberated by task forces that struck like lightning and vanished before retaliation could arrive. The machines that had seemed unstoppable were beginning to show signs of confusion and tactical uncertainty. Commander Elena Vasquez coordinated between human forces and alien resistance groups, helping them adapt to human tactical doctrines while learning from their knowledge of local conditions. Her people had become bridges between the exiled humans and the galaxy they were now saving, translating both language and culture in ways that prevented misunderstandings. The liberation of the Proxima system marked a turning point in the war against the Devourers. Human forces didn't just drive off the machine fleet. They captured intact Devourer vessels and began reverse engineering their technology. The machines that had seemed so advanced were revealed to be following predictable patterns that human engineers could understand and exploit. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the Vengeance as reports came in from across the battlefront. Human forces were not just holding the line against the Devourers. They were pushing the machines back system by system. The galaxy that had once exiled humanity now looked to them for salvation, and the humans who had grown up in isolation were proving worthy of that trust. The exile was over, but the real test was just beginning. The heart of the galaxy burned with artificial fire as Captain Alex Morgan led the final assault on the Devourer Command Nexus. The massive structure stretched across light hours of space, a geometric nightmare of metal and energy that converted stellar matter into pure power for the machine fleets. Around it, the last great battle of the war raged as human vessels danced between energy beams that could vaporize planets. 6 months of relentless campaigning had brought humanity to this moment. The Devourers had been pushed back system by system. Their seemingly unstoppable advance turned into a desperate retreat as human tactics proved devastatingly effective against machine logic. Where alien fleets had failed in direct confrontation, human forces succeeded through deception, misdirection, and the kind of creative thinking that no computer could predict. Dr. Chloe Brooks worked frantically in the command center of the HSS Retribution, her fingers flying across holographic displays as she coordinated the technical teams that were humanity's secret weapon. The breakthrough had come 3 weeks ago, when her people discovered that Devourer technology wasn't just sophisticated, it was also vulnerable to the same kind of creative reprogramming that humans had used to break their own exile. The machines had been built by a species that thought in straight lines, creating systems that were efficient and logical, but utterly unable to adapt when faced with opponents who refused to follow predictable patterns. Human programmers had learned to think like viruses, finding ways to slip malicious code into Devourer networks that turned their own weapons against them. Admiral Morrison commanded the battle from the Bridge of the Vengeance, watching as his task forces executed maneuvers that would have seemed impossible to the rigid galactic mind. Ships appeared and disappeared through hyperspace jumps calculated to the millisecond, striking at weak points that human analysis had identified in the seemingly impregnable command structure. The aliens who fought alongside human forces had learned to trust tactics they didn't understand. Zephyrian crystal ships followed human leaders into maneuvers that violated every principle of traditional galactic warfare, while Colliery collective vessels coordinated with human squadrons in ways that required individual initiative their species had never valued before. Engineer Nick Rodriguez monitored the assault from his position aboard a technical support vessel, watching as his modifications to human weapons proved their worth against the ultimate test. The quantum torpedoes that had first damaged the soul barrier now tore through Devourer defenses like paper, while dimensional phase weapons struck targets that existed in parallel reality streams. The battle reached its climax when Captain Morgan's strike team penetrated the command nexus itself, fighting their way through automated defenses that adapted and evolved with each step. The machines threw everything they had at the human intruders, but creativity and improvisation proved stronger than raw computational power. Dr. Brooks guided the technical assault from her command post, directing teams of human specialists as they inserted carefully crafted viruses into the Devourer central processing matrix. The code they used was based on human thought patterns, chaotic and unpredictable algorithms that machine logic couldn't parse or counter. Within minutes, the entire nexus began turning against itself. The Devourers had built their command structure to be perfectly efficient, with every system connected to every other system for maximum coordination. That efficiency became their downfall as human viruses spread through the network like wildfire, turning the machine's own weapons against their creators and causing cascade failures that rippled across light years of space. Lieutenant Curl Amy Chun watched from the HSS Vengeance as the command nexus began to tear itself apart, its massive structure convulsing as internal explosions sent debris streaming across the galactic core. The machines that had seemed unstoppable just months ago were now destroying themselves, their perfect logic corrupted by human chaos. The final moments came with shocking suddenness. The command nexus collapsed in on itself, its exotic matter structure creating a brief artificial black hole that swallowed the remaining Devourer forces before evaporating in a burst of Hawking radiation. The galaxy's greatest threat was gone, consumed by its own perfection, turned against itself. Captain Taylor received surrender signals from the last scattered Devourer fleets within hours of the command nexus destruction. Without their central coordination, the machines reverted to simple defensive protocols that made them easy targets for human forces. The war that had consumed half the galaxy was over, and humanity had emerged as its unlikely saviors. The victory celebrations across liberated space were unlike anything in galactic history. Species that had been enemies for millennia came together, in gratitude to the humans who had saved them from extinction. The Zephyrians, who had once judged humanity too violent for civilized space, now offered their crystal cities as monuments to human courage and sacrifice. Fleet Admiral Troy Bennett stood in the Great Assembly Hall on Galactic Central, accepting the formal surrender of what remained of the old galactic government. The ceremony was largely symbolic. since effective authority had already passed to human commanders during the war, but the significance was not lost on anyone present. The species that had been exiled for being too dangerous now held the fate of the entire galaxy in their hands. The terms of surrender were generous but firm. Humanity would assume leadership of galactic civilization, but they would rule through cooperation rather than conquest. The old rigid hierarchies would be replaced by systems that valued individual initiative and creative thinking. Species that had lived under authoritarian rule for millennia would learn the concepts of freedom and self-determination that humans took for granted. Dr. Maya Foster, now elevated to the position of Chief Science Advisor for the new galactic government, oversaw the reconstruction efforts that would reshape civilization itself. The Devourer technology, once turned against its creators, provided tools for rebuilding that surpassed anything the galaxy had known before. Worlds that had been stripped to their cores could be restored, and new settlements could be built in systems that had never known life. Engineer Rodriguez led the teams that began converting Devourer infrastructure into tools for creation rather than destruction. The massive processing stations that had once consumed stars were repurposed to generate the exotic materials needed for galactic reconstruction. The machines that had brought death across the stars would now bring life to worlds that had been thought lost forever. Commander Elena Vasquez served as the bridge between old and new, helping alien species adapt to human leadership while ensuring that human administrators understood the complexities of governing a galaxy filled with diverse forms of life. Her people, who had spent decades as refugees and outcasts, became the foundation of a new diplomatic course that valued understanding over domination. General Murphy established the new Galactic Defense Force, a military organization that combined human tactical innovation with alien technological knowledge. The rigid doctrines that had failed against the Devourers were replaced with flexible strategies that emphasized adaptation and creative problem-solving. Never again would the galaxy be caught unprepared by threats that required unconventional responses. The reconstruction proceeded faster than anyone had dared hope. Human engineering principles, applied to alien technology and Devourer resources, created infrastructure projects that spanned entire sectors. Trade routes that had been cut by the machine advance were reestablished and improved, while new colonies were founded on worlds that had been terraformed using converted Devourer equipment. Captain Morgan found himself appointed as administrator of the former Devourer core territories, overseeing the transformation of the galaxy's most devastated region into its most prosperous. The irony was not lost on him that the heart of destruction had become the center of renewal, powered by human determination and alien cooperation. The old Galactic Council chamber was converted into a memorial for the species that had not survived the Devourer onslaught, but the new government that met there was fundamentally different from what had come before. Representatives were chosen by their people rather than appointed by hereditary rulers, and decisions were made through debate and compromise rather than rigid adherence to ancient protocols. Admiral Morrison, now Lord Admiral of the Galactic Fleet, stood before the great viewport in his flagship's observation deck, watching as construction crews put the finishing touches on New Earth Station. The facility would serve as the administrative center for human galactic government, a symbol of how far they had come from the prisoners who had been sealed behind an energy barrier 50 years ago. The galaxy that had once feared human unpredictability now celebrated it as their salvation. The chaos that alien leaders had tried to contain had proven to be exactly what was needed when ordered thinking failed. The exile that was meant to break humanity had instead forged them into something stronger, and the fire that nearly consumed everything had become the flame that lit a new age. The stars that had rejected humanity now belonged to them, not through conquest, but through the simple fact that when the galaxy needed saving, Only humans had possessed the creativity and determination to provide it. The crown of stars waited, for no one but humanity had proven worthy to wear it. The exile was over, the war was won, and the future belonged to those who had learned to thrive in the darkness between the stars. Humanity had been cast out as dangerous children, but they had returned as the galaxy's reluctant but capable parents, ready to guide civilization into an age that no one could have imagined. The fire that had crowned them burned eternal among the stars.